sorry, Aunt Karen, he'd said, his voice eerily calm. You always said medicine was poison. I just thought you should get a taste of your own. That was the last thing I heard before the darkness took me. And now I was back. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor hummed above me. The antiseptic smell burned my nostrils. My mother, Diane, stood wringing her hands, her face pinched with the familiar anxiety I'd seen 1,000 times. And there was my sister-in-law, Michelle, holding up the bottle of anti-rejection medication with the same righteous certainty that had, in my previous life, started this entire downward spiral. Tyler doesn't need this garbage, Michelle announced, her voice carrying that particular edge of self-appointed authority that always made my teeth grind. I've been studying. The textbooks say it's poison. The body heals itself. Hospitals just want to bleed you dry. I opened my mouth. The instinct was that strong. The urge to argue, to fight, to protect, and my body remembered the arguments, the shouting matches, the frantic calls to doctors. I'd spent 18 years fighting this woman, and my body remembered the pattern like muscle memory. But then the pain flickered through me again, that phantom burn in my stomach. Tyler's face cold and victorious. I closed my mouth. Karen, what should we do? Diane's voice quavered. She was looking at me with that desperate, helpless expression, the one that said, I'm afraid to contradict your sister-in-law, so please do it for me, and I'll pretend I had nothing to do with it later. In my previous life, I'd fallen for it every single time. I'd stepped in, either forward. I'd paid the price in every possible way, financially, emotionally, and eventually with my life. This time I smiled. Mom, you should trust Michelle, I said, my voice smooth and calm. She's been studying medicine for years. She'd never put Tyler at risk. The silence that followed was almost comical. Michelle's eyes widened, clearly expecting a fight. Diane blinked at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. Exactly. Michelle recovered quickly, seizing the moment. Thank you, Karen. I'm glad someone in this family has some sense. I watched her set the medication bottle aside and lift Tyler's hospital tray, replacing the prescribed medicine with some concoction she'd mixed herself. The boy, he was only 7, pale and fragile looking after the transplant, looked up at his mother with complete trust. The familiar guilt tugged at me. I'd loved that boy. I'd given up my education, my future, my youth for that boy. And he'd repaid me by feeding me poison and watching me die. Not this time, Tyler. Not this time. 2 days passed with no visible consequences from stopping the anti-rejection medication. Michelle was insufferable in her triumph, walking around the house like she'd personally performed the transplant herself. Diane's anxiety ebbed, replaced by relief and, of course, immediate concern about the financial implications. Your brother's working so hard, Diane said, cornering me in the kitchen while Michelle was occupied with Tyler. And the hospital bills just keep piling up. I don't know how we're going to manage. There it was, the segue I'd been expecting. My mother had a gift for making every crisis about money and every money problem my responsibility. In my previous life, I'd been 22, a college student working multiple jobs to keep myself afloat, and I'd still emptied my bank account for Tyler's treatment. I delivered pizzas at night, worked the fryer at a fast food place during the day, sold my textbooks and my laptop. I'd done it because I couldn't stand to see my mother cry. And then, when I had nothing left to give, she tried to marry me off to a man twice my age for a dowry. Karen, I'm sure you can help out with. Actually, Mom, I interrupted smoothly. I'm sure Michelle has everything under control. She's been so insistent about taking a holistic approach. I wouldn't want to step on her toes. Diane's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but the cost of the treatments. Holistic treatments are usually cheaper, right? That's part of the appeal. I tilted my head, playing innocent. Isn't that what Michelle keeps saying? That hospitals overcharge and natural remedies are more affordable. I could practically see the gears turning in my mother's head. She couldn't argue with me without undermining Michelle's entire medical philosophy. And she desperately wanted to believe Michelle's philosophy was correct, because that meant the money problem might magically solve itself. She settled for giving me a wounded look, the kind that was supposed to fill me with guilt. It didn't. I moved back to campus the next day, using the excuse of finals. Diane tried to stop me, of course, wringing her hands and talking about how Tyler needed his family around him. How could I abandon him at a time like this? Mom, I said, keeping my voice calm and reasonable. You have Michelle. She's the expert now, remember? Tyler doesn't need me getting in the way of her treatments. It was the perfect argument. Diane couldn't argue against Michelle's expertise without admitting she didn't trust Michelle, and she would never do that. Not when it was easier to make me the villain. I walked out the door with my duffel bag over my shoulder, and I didn't look back. The next few weeks were peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I went to class that I studied at the library. I started working on the scholarship application for an exchange program I'd heard about, one that would take me overseas. In my previous life, I'd never even considered leaving. I've been too busy being the family's safety net, too busy trying to keep Tyler alive, too busy working myself to exhaustion to dream about anything beyond survival. This time I was planning. But peace doesn't last when you have a family like mine. The first call came 3 weeks later. Diane's voice on the other end was hysterical, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Tyler collapsed. He's not waking up. Karen, you have to come home right now. You have to call an ambulance. You have to. Mom, I interrupted, keeping my voice deliberately calm. Isn't Michelle there? Yes, but she wants to try acupuncture first. She says the hospital will just. So let her try acupuncture. She knows what she's doing, right? You've been telling me that for weeks. You have to come home. Diane was sobbing now, the sound grating and familiar. I can't handle this by myself. You need to be here. You need to. I'm in the middle of finals, Mom. I can't just leave. What's more important, your nephew or your exams? The question that had been used against me so many times. The trap I'd fallen into over and over again. Mom, if I fail my exams, I lose my scholarship. If I lose my scholarship, I can't afford to stay in school. And if I can't stay in school, I can't get a good job. And if I can't get a good job, I can't help you with money. I delivered it in one breath, rehearsed and smooth. Diane started to argue, but I was already pulling the phone away from my ear. Sorry, Mom. My professor's calling. Gotta go. I hung up and turned my phone to do not disturb. I found out later from a mutual family friend that Tyler had eventually been taken to the hospital. Apparently, Michelle's acupuncture hadn't worked. Neither had the herbal remedies she tried next. When Tyler stopped breathing entirely, Diane had finally overruled her and called an ambulance. The medical team was not kind. The ER doctor tore into Michelle, calling her negligent and dangerously misinformed. There were threats of legal action. There were forms to sign. In my previous life, Tyler had recovered reasonably well from the transplant. He'd had limitations. No running, no sports, no exertion. But he'd been able to live a mostly normal life. He'd gone to school, he'd made friends, he'd grown up into a teenager with a full vocabulary and a capacity for hatred I hadn't seen coming. This time, the complications had been severe. By the time he reached the hospital, his body had started rejecting the donor heart. The anti-rejection medications, the very pills Michelle had dismissed as poison, could have prevented this. Now the damage was done. He would survive, but he'd never be the same. Walking, that was possible, but unsteady. Going to school, the doctors couldn't guarantee it. Playing outside with other children, not a chance. His heart was too fragile now, too damaged by the rejection episode and the subsequent attempts at alternative healing. Michelle blamed the hospital. She raged about incompetent doctors and bureaucratic medicine. She filed complaints. She threatened lawsuits. She refused to accept that her natural remedies had done anything except help. Diane, predictably, started calling me again. Tyler needs you, Karen. He's so weak. He's asking for you. I nearly laughed at that. The boy had never asked for me. Not in any real sense. He'd just absorbed his mother's hatred and his grandmother's guilt-tripping until the only thing he felt for me was resentment. I'm sure Michelle has it under control, Mom. You can't keep using that excuse. She's not. Diane's voice broke. She's not doing very well with him. He's difficult. He's upset all the time. And you want me to come fix it? Well, you're his aunt, aren't you? You should want to help. I closed my eyes and counted to 5. Mom, I'm in the middle of my scholarship application. If I don't finish this, I can't get into the exchange program. And if I can't get into the exchange program, I can't get the kind of degree that earns real money. S.O. unless you want to pay off my student loans yourself. Diane made a strangled sound. I don't have any money for that. Then it sounds like you don't have any money to spare for Tyler either. I guess we're in the same boat. I hung up before she could respond. The scholarship application was my lifeline, and I worked on it obsessively, pouring every spare moment into the essays, the references, the financial projections. In my previous life, I'd never had the chance to leave. I'd been too tied to my family's needs, too broken by their demands. This time I was leaving, one way or another. But I wasn't naive enough to think they'd let me go quietly. If I learned anything from my first life, it was that my family would never voluntarily give up their grip on me. I'd have to cut the cord myself. And to do that, I needed proof. I started recording everything. Every phone call, every text message, every conversation. I made digital copies of every email, every financial transaction, every receipt. It was the 14 binders approach, though I didn't have the budget for actual binders. I had an encrypted folder on my laptop, backed up to 3 different cloud services, with passwords my mother would never guess. The evidence was damning when I put it together. The text from Diane asking me to call ambulances because Michelle wouldn't. The voicemails telling me to drop out of school because my nephew needed me. The bank statements showing I'd paid more for Tyler's medical care than my mother had ever contributed. The recording of Diane admitting she'd altered my college applications to keep me close to home because a girl shouldn't go too far from her family. And most importantly, the evidence of the forced marriage attempt. The transcripts from the meal where a man had been introduced as my future husband, the one my mother hoped would pay enough to fund Tyler's endless medical expenses. I had the proof of everything, and I knew, because I'd seen it happen to others, that this evidence could be devastating if released publicly. But I wasn't ready yet. Not quite. The first attempt to drag me back came during the holidays. Diane called, her voice honey sweet, inviting me to a family celebration for Tyler's birthday. Your brother will be there, she promised, as if that was supposed to be a selling point. And we've invited some special guests. It'll be a wonderful evening. I knew what special guests meant in my previous life. That had been the introduction to the marriage schemed, an older man, wealthy, looking for a young woman to settle down with. The fact that I was young enough to be his daughter had never seemed to bother my mother. I'd love to, I said, even though every instinct screamed at me to stay away. But I need to pick up some papers from the house first. Papers. My birth certificate, my passport, my social security card. I need them for the scholarship applications. There was a pause. I could practically hear Diane calculating, trying to decide if letting me into the house was worth the risk. Of course, sweetheart, she finally said, her voice too bright. We'll see you there. The house looked exactly as it always had. The kitchen counters were cluttered with Michelle's herbal remedies, the dining table covered in bills and medical paperwork. Tyler was propped up on the couch, pale and hollow-eyed, watching TV with the remote clutched in his thin hands. He didn't look at me when I walked in. He didn't say anything at all. Karen, you're here? Diane rushed forward, her smile fixed firmly in place. I'm so glad. We have some lovely people to introduce you to. I followed her gaze to the living room. There they were, the man I remembered from my previous life, the wealthy older gentleman with the hungry eyes and the too firm handshake. And his companion, a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine ad, all sharp angles and predatory cheerfulness. "This is Mr. Richard Granger," Diane said, practically glowing with pride. "He's a prominent businessman in the area. And his sister, Patricia. They're very interested in meeting you." I could feel Tyler's eyes on me now. There was something in his gaze I didn't remember from the first time around, a flicker of wariness, maybe even suspicion, but I didn't have time to analyze it. I stepped forward, extending my hand to Patricia. "Lovely to meet you," I said, pitching my voice slightly higher than usual. "Diane mentioned you might be interested in getting to know the family." Patricia's handshake was bone-crushing. "Charmed. Your mother speaks so highly of you." "Does she?" There was a moment of awkward silence. Diane jumped in quickly. "Karen, why don't you show Patricia around the garden? It's such a lovely afternoon." I smiled. "Actually, I need to find those documents first. My scholarship deadline is tomorrow." "Your scholarship?" Richard Granger spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel. "You're still in school?" "Of course. I'm hoping to go overseas next year. The exchange program will open up so many possibilities." Diane's face went rigid. "Overseas? Karen, we haven't discussed." "Oh, I've been very careful about the planning." I waved a dismissive hand. "Full funding. Financial aid. I won't need a penny from the family." Richard Granger looked at me with something that might have been reluctant respect. Patricia, on the other hand, looked like she just smelled something unpleasant. "Very independent," Patricia said coldly. "How charming." "The documents," I reminded Diane, already heading for the stairs. The birth certificate was easy. IT was in the cabinet in the living room, right where it had always been. My passport was in the same drawer, along with my social security card. I slipped them all into my bag while Diane was still trying to make small talk with the Grangers. In my previous life, I'd been horrified when I realized what the special guests meant. I'd felt betrayed, furious, used. Now, I just felt tired. I walked back into the living room, bag slung over my shoulder, and smiled at the assembled group. Found what I needed. "Thank you for inviting me, but I really should go. The deadline waits for no one, as they say." "You're leaving?" Tyler's voice was weak and scratchy, but there was something clear in it. Something almost accusatory. I met his eyes. In my previous life, I'd loved him so much. I'd given him everything, and he'd killed me without hesitation. "I have to, Tyler. Some of us have to work for what we want." He flinched. I couldn't tell if it was the words that stung or just the way I said them. "Karen, you can't just," Diane started. "Actually, I can. Watch me." I walked out the door and didn't look back. The scholarship application was accepted 3 weeks later. I'd be leaving for London in the fall with a full ride and the kind of freedom I hadn't experienced since childhood. But the news that reached me through the family grapevine was less celebratory. Tyler was having complications again. The rejection had left permanent damage, and now his kidneys were starting to fail. Michelle was still refusing to trust doctors, though the hospital was starting to push back. Child Protective Services had been called in. There were threats, legal actions, investigations. Diane called me every day for a week, begging me to come home. "You can't just abandon your own nephew like this. He's dying, Karen. He was dying before, Mom, and you didn't have any problem with Michelle taking over his treatment then." "That's different." "Is it? You're being cruel. You're being a cold, heartless person. I raised you better than this." "Did you, Mom? Because I've been going through the records, checking the numbers, and I'm finding out a lot of interesting things. Like how much money I gave you for Tyler's treatment, every penny I earned in college, and how none of it actually went to his medical care." I could hear the hitch in her breathing. The silence stretched for a long, uncomfortable moment. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally said, her voice shrill. "Let me spell it out for you. You took my tuition money, my rent money, my food money, and you used it to buy Michelle's herbal remedies. You told me it was going to the hospital, but it wasn't. You lied to me." I've got the bank statements, Mom. I've got all the receipts. I've got years of proof that you stole from me. I didn't steal from you. It was for the family. You should want to help the family. Then why didn't you ask me? Why did you lie?" The line went dead. She'd hung up. I should have known she wouldn't give up easily. Diane was a survivor, in her own twisted way. She'd sacrificed my welfare for her convenience my whole life, and she'd never once shown an ounce of genuine remorse. The next attack came in the form of social media. A video went viral, a middle-aged woman sobbing on camera, clutching pictures of a sickly child, begging the world to help her find her ungrateful daughter who had abandoned the family. I knew the accusation would come. NY mother had made herself into a sympathetic figure before the internet could dig. She was a grieving grandmother. She was a concerned mother. She was just asking for help. And I was the monster who had walked out. The internet mob found me quickly. My school inbox was flooded with hate mail. Someone leaked my phone number, that I got death threats. Actual, credible threats. A brick was thrown through my apartment window. And in the middle of all of it, my mother was collecting donations, setting up a crowdfunding account, trying to make money off her own victim narrative. I let it run for a week. Let the narrative build. Let my mother dig herself deeper into the web of lies. Let the internet believe what they wanted to believe. And then I released my counter evidence. The video went up on a Friday night. It was professionally produced, not too polished, but careful enough to seem credible. I started with my own words, speaking directly to the camera. Some of you have seen the video of a woman claiming to be my mother. She's raised thousands of dollars in your donations. She's made me out to be a monster. I can't say I blame you for believing her. She's very convincing when she wants to be. I paused, letting the words sink in. But I'd like to show you the truth. This is what my mother's video didn't tell you. What followed was a rapid-fire montage of evidence. The bank statements showing my mother had taken thousands of dollars from me over the years, using my tuition funds to buy alternative medicines for my nephew. The texts from her begging me to drop out of school and take care of him because your nephew needs you more than you need an education. The audio recording of her admitting she'd altered my college applications to keep me trapped in your home. And the final piece, the recording from the day the Grangers had been introduced to me, where she described me as fertile and compliant. The video went viral within hours. The comments flooded in, first defensive and angry, then slowly, grudgingly, shifting as people began to process what they'd seen. The follow-up was even more devastating. I posted documents showing that my mother's crowdfunding campaign had raised $47,000 and that $0 had gone to my nephew's actual care. The money was being used to pay off her overdue bills, her credit cards, her mortgage. By Monday morning, Diane's social media accounts had been removed. The crowdfunding platform had frozen her account, and the internet's attention had turned from sympathy to fury. "I can explain," Diane said when she finally called, her voice shaking. "Explain what, Mom? That you spent my tuition money on herbal supplements, that you tried to sell me to a stranger for your grandson's medical bills, that you're pocketing donations for a dying child? It was for Tyler. Everything was for Tyler. You realize that sounds worse, right? You sound like someone who's willing to sacrifice everyone else to save the golden child. Tyler is your nephew. He's your grandson. You should be protecting him. Instead, you're using him to make yourself money. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Mom, every single thing that's happened is a direct result of you. You let Michelle stop his medication. You refused to take him to the hospital. You let him suffer because you were too afraid to contradict her. And then, when I tried to help, you lied to me, stole from me, and tried to sell me. Karen, please. I'm done. I'm done being your bank account. I'm done being your scapegoat. I'm done cleaning up the messes you make because you can't stand up for yourself." I hung up before she could respond, and I blocked her number. The aftermath was brutal for everyone else. My brother, who had been conspicuously absent throughout the whole saga, was forced to answer for his family's actions. His employer did a background check, found the videos and the records, and promptly fired him. There was a restaurant, his bar of choice, where he'd been charging expensive meals to my mother's credit card. I didn't create that evidence. The internet did. My brother's reputation crumbled. He lost his job. His friends melted away. He was left with nothing but a broken down house and a wife who had long since stopped pretending to be patient. But the most devastating blow came later, when my family's internal chaos exploded in ways I hadn't anticipated. The news broke in my 4th month abroad. My brother had been caught in an affair. Worse, he'd been hiding it for years. A whole separate relationship, a whole separate family. There was a child, a toddler boy, and a woman who had been waiting for him to leave his wife for most of a decade. My mother, who had always proudly presented my brother as the responsible one, was furious. She stormed over to his mistress's apartment. She screamed. She threatened. She fought with the woman and shoved her down the stairs, nearly killing the toddler boy she'd been carrying. Michelle, still living in the family house with a sickly son and an absent husband, tried to confront her. She was arrested for assault. The family imploded within weeks, and I wasn't there to clean up the mess. Tyler died in the middle of that chaos. It wasn't dramatic. He'd been in hospice for weeks, his body too damaged by the rejection episode and the years of alternative care to recover. My mother had used the crowdfunding money to pay his medical bills. Too late and not enough. Her own health was failing, and my brother's mistress had accused her of child endangerment. I found out from a hospital update. The doctors had been kind enough to forward the record to my email address, since I was listed as a next of kin for my previous life's involvement. The boy I'd raised as my own, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, the boy who had poisoned me without hesitation in another life, he was gone. I sat in my London apartment and stared at the email for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel anything really. Because in a way, I had already mourned Tyler. I'd mourned him when I realized I couldn't save him. I'd mourned him when I understood that the person he'd become, even in that alternate life, the one where he'd killed me, was a direct result of the family that had molded him. I mourned him now, but only for the child he might have been. The child he never had the chance to become. There's no dramatic resolution to this story, an moment where my family understands what they did wrong. No big reconciliation scene where my mother finally admits she was wrong and begs for forgiveness. And heartfelt apology from my brother. The last time I spoke to Michelle, she was in prison. Her voice was small and broken, and she asked me to send her a picture of Tyler. "He was such a beautiful boy," she said. "I never meant for any of this to happen." But not meaning isn't enough. Not when the consequences of your choices stretch out for years. Not when the people who trusted you end up paying the price. The last time I spoke to my mother, she was in a nursing home, alone and abandoned, having spent the last of her money on a lawyer who couldn't save her. "Karen," she said, "I love you." I didn't say it back, because the words felt empty, like they'd always been empty. I never loved her the way she'd wanted me to, but maybe I'd learned to stop pretending. Some people might ask if I regret it, if I feel guilty, if I wish I could have saved Tyler. I don't. I made my peace with that a long time ago. The first time around, I gave everything I had to save my family. I sacrificed my dreams, my education, my future. I gave them my youth, my money, my love. And they repaid me by killing me. The second time around, I chose me. It wasn't the easy choice. It wasn't the noble choice, but it was the right choice. And when I close my eyes at night, I can still feel the burning in my stomach from the poison Tyler gave me. I can still see his face, cold and triumphant, watching me die. But I can also see the life I built instead. the career I made for myself, the friendships I cultivated, the relationship I found with a man who sees me as a partner, not a stepping stone. I'm not a hero. I'm not a villain. I'm just a woman who decided, after years of being everyone else's backup plan, that I deserve to be my own. And I'm okay with that. But sometimes, on the days when I miss the child Tyler used to be, the little boy with the big eyes and the tiny voice, the one who used to clutch my hand in the hospital and beg me not to leave, I wonder what he might have grown up to become if things had been different. I don't dwell on it. I've done enough of that in the first life. But I still wonder. 3 years past 0.3 years of building a life that had nothing to do with the wreckage I'd left behind. I'd finished my degree in London, landed a job at a marketing firm, and slowly, painstakingly, learned what it felt like to wake up without dread in my chest. I even started dating. His name was Marcus, a graphic designer with a dry wit and a patient smile. He knew the broad strokes of my past, the estranged family, the betrayal, the escape, but he never pushed for details. He just held my hand when I had nightmares and made me breakfast on the mornings I couldn't get out of bed. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Then the call came. Karen, this is St. Jude's Continuing Care. We have a patient here, Tyler Wallace. He's been in a vegetative state for over 2 years, but he's recently regained consciousness. You're listed as his next of kin. My blood went cold. Tyler? But I was told he died. There was a miscommunication with the hospital at the time. He was declared clinically dead for approximately 90 seconds, but resuscitation was successful. He's been in our facility since then. His grandmother, Diane, had made arrangements, but she's no longer able to manage his care. We need someone to make decisions. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. In my previous life, Tyler had grown up, poisoned me, and I died. In this life, the child had suffered horribly and nearly died. Now he was awake. What's his condition? I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Physically, he's very weak. The rejection episode damaged multiple organs, and he'll likely need a wheelchair for the foreseeable future, but cognitively, he's alert. He's been asking for you, actually to be my name. That was strange. In this timeline, I'd barely been in his life. I'd left when he was 7. Why would he remember me? I'll book a flight, I heard myself say. Marcus was supportive as always. He offered to come with me, but I shook my head. This was something I had to face alone. The facility was clean and sterile, the kind of place that smelled of bleach and desperation. The nurse led me to a private room, and there he was, Tyler, now 10 years old, pale and gaunt, propped up on pillows with tubes running from his arms. But his eyes were wrong. They were too old, too knowing. When he looked at me, it wasn't the gaze of a child. It was the gaze of someone who had seen death and come back with souvenirs. Aunt Karen, he said, his voice scratchy from disuse. You came? I sat down slowly, keeping distance between us. The nurse said you were asking for me. I remember everything. He paused, licking dry lips. Not just this life, the other one. The one where I gave you the poison. My heart stopped. What are you talking about? I killed you, Karen. I watched you die on the kitchen floor, and I felt good about it. And then I woke up here, in this broken body, and I remember all of it. Every second. I stood up so fast the chair scraped backward. That's impossible. Is it? You're here, aren't you? You came back too. I can see it in your eyes. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I stared at him, searching for any sign of deception. But there was none. This was Tyler, but it was also the teenager who had poisoned me, the adult who had hated me with a cold, methodical fury. Why are you telling me this? I demanded. Because I'm sorry. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Aunt Karen. I was a monster. I believed everything my mother told me, everything my grandmother whispered in my ear. I didn't see what you sacrificed for me. Your education, your youth, your future. I just saw the medicine you made me take and blamed you for my limitations. He started crying, silent tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I had to tell you. I had to say it out loud because I can't carry it anymore. Not again. I sat back down, my legs weak. This was not what I'd expected. In my previous life, Tyler had shown no remorse, no hesitation. He'd watched me die with satisfaction. But that was a different Tyler. That was a boy raised on hatred, poisoned by his mother's bitterness. This Tyler, this one had lived through the worst of both worlds, and somehow he'd come out the other side with a conscience. I don't know what to say, I admitted. Say nothing. Just don't leave me here alone. Please. I didn't know if I could trust him. Every instinct I had screamed at me to walk away, to let him rot in that facility, to finally be free of the family that had destroyed me. But there was something in his eyes, not the cold calculation of the teenager who had killed me, but the desperate plea of a child who had seen too much. I agreed to stay for a week, to help with his transition, to see if there was any possibility of rebuilding something from the ashes. But the past wasn't done with me yet. The first complication arrived in the form of my brother, Daniel. He'd gotten wind that I was back in the country, and he showed up at the nursing home like a bad penny. Karen, he spread his arms wide, as if we were old friends. I heard you were back. How's London? You look amazing, really. I didn't return the embrace. What do you want, Daniel? His smile flickered, but didn't falter. I need your help. It's about my son, my new son, Jason. He's been diagnosed with a heart condition. The doctors say it's genetic, probably from Dad's side. I don't have the money for the surgery, and Mom can't help anymore, and Michelle's, well, you know. I didn't know. Michelle had been released from prison the previous year, having served a short sentence for assault. She'd been living in a halfway house, trying to rebuild her life, but she had no money and no prospects. What exactly are you asking me for? I said. Just a loan. Enough to cover the initial procedures. I'll pay back, I swear. I've got a new job. It's not great, but it's steady, and... Daniel. I stopped him with a raised hand. You've never paid me back for anything. You took my tuition money, you drained my savings, and you never once said thank you. Why would I trust you now? He had the nerve to look offended. That was different. That was for Tyler. This is for Jason. He's just a kid, Karen. He's innocent. So was Tyler. So was I. But none of that ever stopped you from using me. Daniel's face hardened. You think you're better than us now? You think you can just walk away and pretend you're not part of this family? Actually, yes, I can. And I am... I turned and walked back into the facility, leaving him standing in the parking lot, his mouth open and his hands clenched into fists. That night, Tyler asked me what had happened. I told him about Daniel's visit, about the new son with a heart condition. He always does this, Tyler said quietly. He always finds someone else to drain. Mom used to say he was just resourceful, but I know the truth now. He's a parasite. I looked at him, really looked. This was the same boy who had once hated me, and yet here he was, speaking with the clarity of someone who had spent years observing his family's dysfunction from the outside. Your father isn't a good man, I said carefully. He never was, but I didn't see it until I died, until I woke up here with all those memories and realized I'd been just like him. He swallowed. I used you too. I let Mom and Grandma poison me against you, and I killed you for it. Tyler. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm just telling you the truth. He met my eyes. But I want you to know that I'm not going to be that person anymore. I don't have the strength to be him even if I wanted to, and I don't want to. It was a strange thing to hear from a 10-year-old boy, even one who carried the weight of 2 lives in his fragile body. But I believed him. Not fully, not yet, but enough to stay. The second complication arrived 3 days later, Michelle. She'd been released from prison and had somehow tracked me down. She showed up at the facility with a shabby coat and a hunted expression, demanding to see Tyler. You can't just keep him from me, she shrieked. He's my son. He's been here for 2 years, I said calmly. Where were you? I was in prison. Because of your family. Because they lied and schemed and... She broke off, her voice cracking. Please, Karen, just let me see him. I looked at Tyler. He was watching his mother with an expression I couldn't read. Not anger, not love, just exhaustion. Mom, he said, his voice flat. You look terrible. Michelle rushed to his bedside, grabbing his hand. Oh, my baby. My poor baby. They said you were brain dead, but I never believed it. I knew you'd come back to me. I didn't come back for you, Tyler said quietly. I came back because I had unfinished business, and you're not part of it. Michelle recoiled as if slapped. What are you talking about? I'm your mother. You stopped being my mother the day you stopped my anti-rejection medication. You killed me, Mom. Maybe not with your hands, but with your choices. I was trying to help you. I read the books, I studied. You read quack books and believed the lies you wanted to believe. Tyler's voice was steady, but there was a sharp edge to it, and I paid for it with my health, with my life, twice over. So please, save your tears. They don't mean anything anymore. Michelle started crying, great heaving sobs that filled the room. I stood in the corner, watching, feeling nothing but a dull, distant pity. This woman had destroyed her own son through sheer arrogance, and now she had to live with the consequences. Michelle left that night, but she didn't go far. She rented a room in a motel down the street and started showing up every day, demanding to see Tyler. The nursing home staff, caught in the middle, eventually called me. She's not going to stop, I told Tyler. She's your legal guardian. Not anymore. He reached for a drawer in his bedside table and pulled out a folded document. I filed for emancipation that I had the hospital social worker help me. It's not official yet, but it's in process. I stared at him. You're 10 years old. They won't grant emancipation to a 10-year-old. No, probably not. He shrugged, a surprisingly adult gesture. But it'll buy us time, and it'll make it harder for her to drag me back into her world. I've already told the staff I don't want to see her, they're backing me up. I realized in that moment that this boy was far more capable than I'd given him credit for. The first Tyler had been a victim of his upbringing, a pawn in his mother's games. This Tyler had lived through the worst of it and emerged with a ruthlessness that surprised me. I'll do what I can, I said, but I can't stay forever. I have a life in London. I know. He met my eyes. I don't expect you to sacrifice everything for me again. I just want to know that someone in this family cares enough to make sure I'm not abandoned. It was such a small request, and yet it broke something in me, because I remembered the first life, the way I'd given everything and received nothing in return. And here was this boy, this ghost of the person who had killed me, asking for the bare minimum of human decency. I won't abandon you, I said, but I won't set myself on fire to keep you warm either. Are we clear? He nodded. Clear. The third complication came from an unexpected angle, my mother. She'd been living in a nursing home, estranged from everyone, but she'd gotten wind of Tyler's awakening through some grapevine. She sent me a letter, handwritten in shaky cursive. Karen, I know you think I'm a monster. I know I failed you. But please let me see Tyler one last time. He's my grandson. I need to tell him I'm sorry. I read the letter 3 times, trying to find the hidden manipulation, the guilt trip, the emotional blackmail, but it wasn't there. It was just an old woman, broken and alone, reaching out from the ruins of her life. I showed it to Tyler. What do you think? I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. She's dying, isn't she? The doctors say she has maybe 6 months. Heart failure. Then let her come. He handed the letter back to me, but I'm not going to forgive her. I just want to see her face when she realizes that. The meeting was arranged for the following week. Diane was wheeled into the nursing home's day room, looking shriveled and gray, her eyes darting around nervously. She didn't look at me. She looked at Tyler. Baby, she breathed. My baby. Tyler regarded her with cool detachment. Hello, Grandma. I'm so sorry. For everything. The money. The lies. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted to keep the family together. And you destroyed it instead, Tyler said. You stole from Aunt Karen. You tried to sell her to a stranger. You let Mom poison me with her nonsense. And you never once admitted you were wrong. I know. Diane reached for him, but he pulled back. Please, just let me hold you one more time. No. The word was quiet, but it landed like a slap. Diane's face crumpled. She looked at me, desperate, but I shook my head. You made your choices, Mom, I said. Now you live with them. She started crying again, but it didn't matter. Tyler had already wheeled himself out of the room. The final twist came 2 weeks later, when Michelle finally snapped. She'd been skulking around the facility, trying to get access to Tyler, but the staff had been vigilant. Frustrated and furious, she decided to take her revenge on the person she blamed most, Daniel. She found him at his new apartment, the one he shared with his new partner and their young son, Jason. She'd brought a knife. She confronted him in the living room while the child was asleep in the next room. You ruined my life, she screamed. You left me for that woman. You abandoned our son. You let him die. Daniel, ever the coward, tried to calm her down. Michelle, put the knife down. Let's talk about this. Talk. She laughed, a hysterical sound. You never wanted to talk. You just wanted to take. Take my money, take my son, take everything. And I let you. She lunged. Daniel tried to block her, but she was faster, stronger, fueled by years of rage. She stabbed him once, twice, a dozen times until he collapsed. Then she turned the knife on herself. The police found them hours later, both dead, the child in the next room miraculously unharmed. I read the news online, sitting in Tyler's room at the nursing home. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing. Daniel's dead, I said. And Michelle. Tyler didn't flinch. I expected something like this. She was always unstable. He was always selfish. It was only a matter of time. You're not sad. Son. He looked at me with those ancient eyes. I'm relieved. They can't hurt anyone else now. It was a cold thing to say, but I understood it. In his own way, Tyler had been the victim of their war. And now, finally, the war was over. I stayed in the country for another month, settling Tyler's affairs and making arrangements for his long-term care. I found a foster family, a middle-aged couple with experience caring for special needs children who agreed to take him in. They were kind people, and Tyler seemed to like them. Before I left, he asked me one last question. Are you ever coming back? Maybe, I said. Not permanently, but I'll visit, and I'll call. That's more than I deserve. Probably. I smiled, surprising myself. But we're both survivors, Tyler. That counts for something. He nodded, and I walked out of the room. Back in London, Marcus was waiting. He wrapped his arms around me and held me while I cried, not for the family I'd lost, but for the family I'd finally let go. You did the right thing, he murmured. You always do. I didn't know if that was true, but for the first time in a long time, I believed it could be. I thought I was done. I truly did. Back in London, life settled into a rhythm I'd craved for years. Marcus and I found a flat in Clapham with a small garden and a cat that adopted us from the alley. My marketing job was stable, my colleagues were pleasant, and for the first time in either of my lives, I felt something dangerously close to normal. But normal never lasts when you've lived through what I have. The universe has a sick sense of humor, and it likes to wait until you've let your guard down before it delivers the next punch. 6 months after I returned from the States, I got a call from Tyler's foster mother, Patricia. Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Karen, I'm sorry to bother you, but something's happened. Tyler's run away. I nearly dropped the phone. What do you mean, run away? He can barely walk. He's taken his wheelchair and disappeared. We found a note in his room. He said he had to go find his mother. But his mother is dead, Karen. We don't understand it. Neither did I. Michelle had been dead for months. Tyler had been the one to identify her body. He'd shown no grief, no